William stood outside the heavy oak door of his father's private study, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the golden handle. The palace corridors were unusually quiet that evening, with most of the staff having retired for the night. Only the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway broke the silence. He had not intended to come here tonight. In fact, he had been walking to his own chambers when he noticed the thin line of light beneath his father's door. This was strange because King Charles had left for Scotland that morning, or so William had been told. The curiosity got the better of him, and now he found himself standing here, wondering if he should knock or simply walk away. The young prince had been having a difficult few months. Ever since his mother's death, 3 years ago, the relationship between him and his father had grown increasingly strained. They rarely spoke beyond the necessary royal duties, and when they did, their conversations were formal and cold. William often felt like a stranger in his own home, going through the motions of royal life, while feeling completely disconnected from the man who was supposed to guide him. Earlier that day, William had overheard 2 palace staff members whispering about some urgent phone calls that had come in for the king. They had mentioned something about the papers and keeping it quiet. But when they saw William approaching, they quickly changed the subject. This only added to the growing list of secrets and half-truths that seemed to surround his father lately. Taking a deep breath, William slowly turned the handle and pushed the door open just a crack. The study was dimly lit by a single desk lamp, and at first, he could not see anyone inside. But then he heard it. The sound of quiet sobbing coming from the far corner of the room. William's heart began to race. His father never cried. At least not where anyone could see him. The king was always composed, always in control, always the picture of royal dignity. Hearing these broken sobs was like discovering that the sun had decided to rise in the west. He pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The study smelled of old leather books and his father's cologne, a scent that reminded William of happier times, when he was young, and would sometimes be allowed to sit quietly in this same room while his father worked. As his eyes adjusted to the low light, William could see his father sitting in the large armchair beside the fireplace. King Charles was hunched forward, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with each sob. On the small table beside him lay several opened letters and what appeared to be a thick manila folder. William had never seen his father look so small, so broken. The man who commanded the respect of an entire nation, who had carried the weight of the crown with such dignity, looked like a lost child in that moment. William's first instinct was to back away quietly, to pretend he had never seen this vulnerable moment, but something kept his feet planted firmly on the thick carpet. "Father?" William's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. King Charles's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise and embarrassment. His face was streaked with tears, and his usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled from running his hands through it. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with centuries of royal portraits. "William," the king said, his voice hoarse from crying. He quickly wiped his face with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. "I thought you had gone to bed." "I saw the light under the door," William explained, stepping closer but still maintaining his distance. "I thought you were in Scotland." Charles let out a bitter laugh that held no humor. "I was supposed to be. I came back early." He gestured weakly toward the letters on the table. "I had some business to attend to." William looked at the papers scattered across the table. Even from where he stood, he could see official letterheads and what looked like photographs. His father noticed his gaze and quickly moved to cover the documents with his hand. "It's nothing you need to concern yourself with," Charles said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. The silence stretched between them again. William could feel the familiar wall that always seemed to exist between him and his father. But tonight it felt different. Tonight, his father seemed more human, more reachable than he had in years. "Are you all right?" William asked, surprising himself with the genuine concern in his voice. Charles looked up at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in months. He saw a young man who was trying to find his place in the world, who was struggling with his own grief and responsibilities, and who was offering comfort despite the distance that had grown between them. "No," Charles said quietly. "I'm not all right." It was the first honest thing his father had said to him in a very long time. William felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the protective wall he had built around his own heart. "Can I sit down?" William asked, nodding toward the matching armchair across from his father. Charles nodded, and William settled into the familiar chair where he had sat countless times as a child, listening to stories or watching his father work. But now they were both different people, shaped by loss and duty, and the weight of expectations that seemed to grow heavier with each passing year. "You look tired," William observed. His father did look exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and lines that seemed deeper than they had been just a few days ago. "I haven't been sleeping well," Charles admitted. He glanced again at the papers on the table, and William could see his jaw tighten with some internal struggle. "What's in the letters?" William asked gently. Charles was quiet for so long that William thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Mistakes," he said. "Old mistakes that refused to stay buried." William wanted to ask more, but something in his father's expression warned him to wait. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The only sound, the soft crackling of the fire. It was the most peaceful moment they had shared in years, despite the obvious pain his father was experiencing. Finally, Charles reached for one of the letters. His hands were shaking slightly as he held it. "There are things about the past," he began slowly. William felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. Whatever was in those letters had reduced his father to tears, and he wasn't sure he was ready to know what could have such a devastating effect on the man he had always seen as unbreakable. "Maybe some things are better left in the past," William said carefully. Charles looked at him with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "You've grown wise," he said. "More wise than your father, it seems." "I've had a good teacher in some things," William replied, and he meant it. Despite their problems, despite the distance between them, his father had taught him about duty, about service, about putting the needs of others before his own. Charles's eyes filled with tears again. "I've failed you in so many ways," he whispered. "No," William said firmly. "You haven't." But even as he said the words, William could see that his father was struggling with something much larger than their personal relationship. Whatever was in those letters threatened not just Charles personally, but possibly the entire royal family. The weight of that realization settled over William like a heavy blanket. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight, and both men looked toward the door. Time seemed to move differently in this room tonight, as if the normal rules of the world had been suspended. "I should go," William said, starting to rise from his chair. "Wait," Charles said quickly. "There's something you need to know. Something that will change everything." William sank back into his chair, his heart pounding. Whatever his father was about to tell him, he knew that their lives would never be the same after this night. William's mouth went dry as he watched his father's internal struggle play out across his weathered face. Charles picked up one of the photographs from the table, stared at it for a long moment, then set it down again with shaking hands. 30 years ago, Charles began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I made a decision that I thought would protect our family. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now—" He trailed off, unable to continue. William leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of decision?" Charles stood up abruptly and walked to the large window that overlooked the palace gardens. The moonlight cast long shadows across his face, making him look older than his years. "There was a woman," he said to the window, "before I married your mother. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She worked in the palace kitchens, just a simple girl from a small village, but she was kind, and she was genuine, and for a brief time, she made me feel like a normal person instead of a future king." William felt his stomach drop. He had heard rumors over the years, whispers about his father's relationships before marriage, but nothing like this, nothing that would explain the devastation he was witnessing. "We fell in love," Charles continued. "Real love. Not the arranged partnerships that were expected of me. For 3 months, we met in secret. She would slip up to the old tower room after her shift, and we would talk for hours. She knew nothing about royal protocol or politics. She just knew me as Charles, not as the heir to the throne." Charles turned back toward his son, tears streaming down his face again. she became pregnant. The words hit William like a physical blow. He gripped the arms of his chair, his mind racing with the implications. What happened to her? William asked, though he was afraid of the answer. When Sarah told me about the baby, I panicked. I was only 25, and the pressure from the royal advisors was enormous. They said it would cause a scandal that could damage the monarchy forever. They said I had to choose between my duty to the crown and my personal feelings. Charles walked back to his chair but didn't sit down. Instead, he stood behind it, using it as a barrier between himself and his son. The advisors arranged for Sarah to leave the palace immediately. They gave her money, enough to start a new life somewhere far away. They told her it was for the best, for everyone involved. And his voice broke, I let them do it. I was too much of a coward to fight for her, to fight for what we had. William felt sick. You never saw her again? I tried to find her once, about 5 years later. But she had disappeared completely. The advisors had done their job too well. It was as if she had never existed. Charles finally sat down, looking completely defeated. For 30 years, I've lived with that guilt. I've tried to convince myself that I made the right choice, that duty had to come before personal happiness. I threw myself into my royal responsibilities, eventually married your mother, and tried to build a good life. But I never stopped wondering what happened to Sarah. Or to... He couldn't finish the sentence. To your child, William said quietly. Charles nodded. My first child. The weight of this revelation settled over William like a heavy blanket. He had a sibling somewhere in the world. Someone who shared his blood, but had grown up without any knowledge of their royal heritage. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. How did you find out? William asked, nodding toward the letters on the table. Charles picked up one of the manila folders. 3 days ago, I received a call from a private investigator. Someone had hired him to look into their family history. They had traced their mother's past back to her time working at the palace. William's heart began to race. They know? Sarah died 2 years ago, Charles said, his voice breaking again. Cancer. But before she died, she told her child the truth. She gave them enough information to start searching. Charles handed William one of the photographs. With trembling hands, William looked down at the image. It showed a woman in her late 20s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. But it was the child beside her that made William's breath catch in his throat. The boy in the photograph couldn't have been more than 8 years old, but the resemblance to William at that age was unmistakable. The same eyes, the same shape of the face, even the same slightly crooked smile that William had inherited from his father. His name is James, Charles said. James Mitchell. He's 31 years old now, just 2 years older than you. He's a teacher in a small town in Wales. He's married, has 2 young children of his own. William stared at the photograph, trying to process everything he was learning. He's been living a normal life all this time. Completely normal, Charles confirmed. Sarah never told him the truth about who his father was. She wanted to protect him from the complications that would come with that knowledge. But when she was dying, she felt he deserved to know. And now he wants to meet you, William said. It wasn't a question, Charles nodded. The investigator says James doesn't want money or recognition. He just wants answers. He wants to understand where he came from, why his mother was so secretive about his father. He wants to know if his father ever thought about him. William set the photograph down on the table, his mind spinning. What are you going to do? I don't know, Charles admitted. If this becomes public, it could destroy everything. The press would have a field day. The scandal could damage the monarchy in ways we might never recover from. There are still people who remember the controversies from my generation, and this would bring it all back. But he's your son, William said firmly. The simple statement hung in the air between them. Charles looked at William with surprise, as if he hadn't expected such a direct response. Yes, Charles said quietly. He's my son, and my brother. Charles nodded again. Your brother. William stood up and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. He thought about all the times he had felt alone, carrying the weight of royal expectations on his shoulders. All this time, There had been someone else out there who shared his blood. Someone who might understand what it felt like to be different. Even though James had grown up in a completely different world. You said he has children, William said. 2. A boy and a girl. 6 and 4 years old. Your grandchildren. Charles put his head in his hands. God, William, what have I done? I've missed his entire life. I've missed watching him grow up. Missed being there for his important moments. Missed meeting my grandchildren. All because I was too afraid to stand up for what was right. William turned back to his father. It's not too late, isn't it? How do I explain 30 years of absence? How do I look him in the eye and tell him that I knew about him but chose to stay away? How do I face the fact that while I was raising you in luxury and privilege, he was growing up without a father? The pain in Charles's voice was raw and devastating. William could see that his father had been carrying this guilt for decades, and the recent discovery that his son was actively looking for him had brought all of that buried anguish to the surface. Maybe, William said carefully. The question isn't how to explain the past. Maybe the question is what you're going to do now. Charles looked up at his son with red, swollen eyes. What if he hates me? What if he doesn't? They stared at each other across the room, both of them grappling with the magnitude of the situation. William could see that his father was terrified, not just of the potential scandal, but of facing the son he had never known. There's more, Charles said quietly. William felt his stomach drop again. More? Charles picked up another letter from the table. James wrote this himself. The investigator included it with his report. With shaking hands, Charles unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. Dear Sir, I know this letter might come as a shock, but I believe you are my father. My mother, Sarah Mitchell, worked at the palace 31 years ago. Before she died, she told me that she had loved someone there. Someone she couldn't stay with because of their different positions in life. She never spoke badly of you. She said you were a good man caught in an impossible situation. I don't want anything from you except the chance to meet you once, to shake your hand, and to tell you that I turned out okay. I want you to know that she never stopped loving you, and that she spoke of you with kindness until the day she died. If you're willing, I would like to meet you. If not, I understand. Sincerely, James Mitchell. By the time Charles finished reading, both men were crying. William wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. The letter had moved him deeply, not just because of what James had written, but because of the grace and understanding in his words. Here was a man who had every right to be angry, to demand explanations, to cause trouble for the royal family. Instead, he was offering forgiveness and understanding. He sounds like a good man, William said softly. Charles nodded, folding the letter carefully and placing it back on the table. He sounds like his mother. Sarah always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. When did you get this letter? Yesterday morning. I've read it at least 50 times since then. Charles rubbed his temples, as if he had a terrible headache. William, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. William straightened in his chair. Of course, if I decide to meet him, if I decide to acknowledge him as my son, what will that mean for you? For your future as heir? I won't pretend that this won't complicate things. William was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. The practical part of his mind understood his father's concern. A secret son could indeed complicate the line of succession, could provide ammunition for Republicans who wanted to abolish the monarchy, could create a media circus that would follow their family for years. But as he looked at his father's tear-stained face, as he thought about James's kind letter, as he imagined a man his own age, who had grown up without knowing his true heritage, William found that the practical concerns seemed less important than doing what was right. I think, William said carefully, that I've been alone in this royal fishbowl for too long. The idea of having a brother, even one I've never met, doesn't frighten me. It gives me hope. Charles's eyes widened with surprise. Really? Really? And as for the complications, we'll handle them as they come. But we can't let fear of what might happen stop us from doing what we know is right. Charles stared at his son with something approaching awe. When did you become so wise? I had a good teacher, William repeated his earlier words, even if he doesn't always give himself enough credit. Charles stood up suddenly. I'm going to call him. Now? William glanced at the clock. It was nearly 1 in the morning. The letter has his phone number. I know it's late, but I can't wait any longer. I've already waited 30 years. William watched as his father picked up the phone with shaking hands. Charles dialed slowly, each number deliberate and careful. Then he waited. The phone pressed to his ear, his face pale with anxiety. Hello? Charles said when someone answered. Yes, I'm looking for James Mitchell. This is Charles. A pause. Yes, that Charles. William could hear the shock in the voice on the other end of the line, even though he couldn't make out the words. Charles began to pace back and forth in front of the fireplace. I received your letter, Charles continued. I was wondering if you might have time to meet tomorrow. I understand if you need time to think about it. But... His voice broke slightly. I've been thinking about you for 30 years. William could only hear his father's side of the conversation, but he could tell that James was agreeing to the meeting. Charles's face had gone from pale to flushed, and his pacing had become more animated. Yes, tomorrow afternoon would be perfect. There's a small private dining room at the Savoy Hotel. Very discreet. 2 o'clock? Charles was nodding even though James couldn't see him. James, I want you to know that not a day has gone by that I haven't wondered about you. Not a single day. When Charles finally hung up the phone, he turned to William with an expression of pure terror and excitement. He's coming, Charles said. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. How did he sound? Nervous, but kind. Just like his letter. Charles sat back down heavily in his chair. William, I want you to come with me. William was surprised. Are you sure? This should be a private moment between you and him. I'm sure. If this is going to be a new beginning for our family, then it should include all of us from the start. Besides, parting, Charles smiled for the first time that evening. He's your brother. You should meet him too. William felt a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement at the prospect of meeting James. He had never imagined that he would have a sibling, and the idea of suddenly having an older brother was both thrilling and overwhelming. The next afternoon, William and Charles sat in the private dining room at the Savoy, both of them barely touching their tea. Charles had changed clothes 3 times that morning, and William had never seen his father so nervous. What if he changes his mind? Charles asked for the 10th time. He won't, William assured him. Did you hear how he sounded on the phone? He wants this as much as you do. At exactly 2 o'clock, there was a soft knock on the door. Charles stood up so quickly that he nearly knocked over his chair. William remained seated, not wanting to overwhelm James by having both of them rush to greet him. Charles opened the door, and William saw his father freeze completely. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked remarkably like both of them. James was tall and lean, with the same brown hair and blue eyes that ran in their family. He was dressed simply in a navy sweater and dark trousers, and he carried himself with quiet dignity. For several seconds, neither man spoke. They just stared at each other. 30 years of separation and wonder passing between them. Hello, James, Charles said finally, his voice thick with emotion. Hello, Father, James replied, and William could hear that he was fighting back tears. The word, father, seemed to break something inside Charles. He stepped forward and, without any hesitation, pulled James into a tight embrace. Both men began to cry openly, holding each other as if they were afraid the other might disappear. William watched this reunion with his own eyes full of tears. He could see the love and regret and hope all mixed together in this single moment. After what felt like several minutes, Charles and James separated, both of them wiping their eyes and laughing awkwardly at their emotional display. James, Charles said, turning toward William, I'd like you to meet your brother. William stood up, his heart pounding. James looked at him with curiosity and warmth, and William was struck by how normal this felt. How natural it seemed to be meeting this stranger who shared his blood. "William," James said, extending his hand. "I've seen you on television, of course. But this is rather different." William shook his brother's hand, then impulsively pulled him into a hug. "I'm glad to finally meet you," he said. "I'm sorry it took so long," James laughed. A sound that was remarkably similar to William's own laugh. "Well, I only found out about you yesterday. So from my perspective, this is happening quite quickly." They all sat down around the small table, and for a few minutes, no one seemed to know where to begin. Finally, Charles spoke. "Tell me about your life," he said to James. "Tell me everything." James smiled. "Well, I'm a primary school teacher in a small town called Llanfairpwll in Wales. I teach 7- and 8-year-olds, and I love it. I married my wife, Emma, 5 years ago. She's a nurse at the local hospital. We have 2 children, Sophie and Michael." Charles leaned forward eagerly. "Tell me about them." "My grandchildren." The pride in James's voice was unmistakable as he pulled out his phone to show pictures. "Sophie is 6, and she's absolutely fearless. She wants to be an astronaut one day. Michael is 4, and he's obsessed with trains. He knows every type of locomotive that's ever been built." 10. William found himself smiling as he looked at the pictures of his niece and nephew. They looked like happy, normal children, completely unaware of their royal heritage. "They're beautiful," Charles said, his voice thick with emotion. "Do they know about me?" James shook his head. "Not yet. I wanted to meet you first, to see what kind of man you are. I needed to know that you're someone I would want them to meet." "And?" Charles asked nervously. James looked at his father for a long moment. "Mother always said you were a good man caught in an impossible situation. Now that I've met you, I can see that she was right." Charles began to cry again, and this time he made no attempt to hide it. "I'm so sorry, James. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry I missed your childhood, your wedding, the birth of your children. I'm sorry for all of it." James reached across the table and took his father's hand. "I forgave you before I even met you. Mother made sure I understood how difficult your position was. She never wanted me to hate you. She wanted me to understand you." William watched this exchange with a mixture of awe and sadness. The grace that both James and his mother had shown was extraordinary. Despite having every reason to be bitter and resentful, they had chosen love and understanding instead. "What happens now?" William asked. James and Charles looked at each other, then at William. It was James who answered. "I don't want to complicate your lives," he said. "I don't want money or titles or recognition. I just want to be part of the family, if you'll have me. I want my children to know their grandfather and their uncle. I want to be your brother, William, if that's something you'd like." William felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I would like that very much." Charles squeezed James's hand. "We'll figure out how to make this work. It won't be easy, with the media and the protocols and all the complications that come with royal life, but we'll figure it out together." James smiled. "I'm a teacher. Remember? I'm used to dealing with complicated situations and finding solutions that work for everyone." They spent the next 3 hours talking, sharing stories, and beginning to build the foundation of a relationship that would change all their lives. When James finally had to leave to catch his train back to Wales, they made plans to meet again the following weekend. As William and Charles walked back to the palace that evening, both of them felt lighter than they had in years. The secret that had tormented Charles for 3 decades was finally out in the open, and instead of the disaster he had feared, he had found forgiveness, love, and a son who was everything he could have hoped for. "Thank you," Charles said to William as they reached the palace gates. "For what?" "For encouraging me to be brave. For supporting me even when you didn't know what it might cost you. For being the kind of son who made me believe I might actually be a decent father. For Ernest." William put his arm around his father's shoulders. "We're going to be okay," he said. "All of us. We're going to be a family." And for the first time in years, both men truly believed it.